All right. Well, hello again, everybody. We're glad to be here for the post show. I'm Perry. What are your guys' names?
I'm Andy.
Gary?
Elizabeth, hi.
Yeah, and this is our time where we get to kind of break down the service and just kind of talk a little bit deeper about what happened or what hit us. So it was a little bit of a downer type of message in some ways.
You think? No.
In some ways, not completely,
I know it's not.
but in some ways, I mean, we were talking about tragedy and things like that. But because of that, let's start with what was your highlight for today's service as a whole?
The sunglasses we found on the pre-show. You'll have to watch and find out.
Yeah, I saw those. Those
It was
were
ridiculous.
Those were awesome.
We found out whose they were, too, halfway through the show. You'll hear us kind of talk about it, and then we'll be like, these were just here. And then all of a sudden, halfway through, we figured out whose they were. So it was kind of fun.
Oh, no, nice.
Just made us laugh.
Yeah, so for those of you who tuned in late, you're going to have to go back
Yep.
Yes.
and check it out. Cool. How about you two? What was your highlight?
Well, so I want to take an opportunity to share. You know, we talked about being able to lament to God and to Jesus and to be open. And, you know, I think about Peyton, who's 3 years old. And when we see each other, I drop whatever I've got and I run in her direction. She runs in my direction. She jumps in my arms. And, you know, I'm tossing her around and she's just totally free and totally with me. Okay? And in Matthew, someplace, I think 13, Jesus says, "Unless you come to me as a little child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven." And that's what I think he's talking about. Just run and jump in his arms. And if you're mad, you're mad. And if you're happy, you're happy. And whoever you are in the moment, he loves you anyway. And I got to say, I am totally honored by having her trust like that. And I think it's honoring to Christ, when we trust him completely.
Yeah.
So
Wait till I see you and jump in your arms. You're going to have a tough time throwing me around.
he's got big shoulders. If we're mad at him, he's
For sure.
okay.
Yep.
He can live with it.
He can handle it.
Yep.
For sure. For sure. How about you, Elizabeth?
Mine, I wrote down what you said, and then I put in parentheses, wow. And it was,
Okay.
I've never done that with what Perry said.
well, it was just like I hadn't
No, it was
heard
good.
it said like this, and it was just like
Yeah.
like kind of like a, not mad at myself, but like, dang it, Elizabeth, why haven't you been thinking this whole time kind of thing?
Opportunity to grow.
Yes. My tragedies are opportunities for God's glory. And it was like I knew that ish because there's things like you can always like,
Yeah.
but it's just like hearing that I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, for sure.
Parentheses.
And, you know, it's one of those things when you're in the middle of tragedy, it's a lot harder to have those thoughts sometimes.
Oh yeah, it's like the last thing that you
because
naturally think.
you're focused on the tragedy. You're focused on the Badlands, right? So I totally get that. Yeah, I think my highlight was probably the worship music.
Yeah, it was a good one.
I felt like it fit really well with the message.
Yeah.
It's like Steve knew what the series was going to be before we started it.
It's like it's written on the whiteboard
Yeah,
in
it's
our office.
amazing. Yeah.
It's almost like there's like planning that goes into a
Yeah,
Sunday
for those of you
morning.
who don't know, we do plan this out a little bit. So
Well, and there was a young lady singing a song, and her whole time she had a beautiful smile on her face. And I just love when she smiles as she sings. It warms my heart.
nice. Who's that? Was that Elizabeth?
It was. Yeah.
You did a great job today. Good job. Yeah. All right. So here's the next question. And we alluded to this a little bit.
Yeah.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how good are you at mourning and why?
I feel like for me it depends. Depends on the situation. I think I am a very emotional, feel my feelings kind of gal. I'm not afraid to cry. I am an ugly crier, so that's the only thing is that, like if I'm really crying, I'm like, guys, give me a second. I look a little funky. But I feel like there's little times when like the big things happen where it's like my brain is trying to process it and grasp what is happening, that it's like I just like shut off and I go in like autopilot and I don't know how to like handle it. And so I feel like there was one time in particular, like it took me months to like fully process it and like grieve and like figure out everything and process everything that had just happened. So
That's a good point that we didn't really talk about. Mourning can take a really long time. It's not necessarily a quick
yeah.
little fix. Yeah.
So I'd probably like a 6.5.
Okay. How about you guys?
I've been practicing for about almost 30 years, my mourning. And when I first started actually focusing on that, a friend who I was going through a difficult time, and he recommended I go out into an open area and just scream at the top of my lungs. And I tried that, and the first time I screamed, I thought to myself, well, that was as wimpy as it gets. You can do better than that. And I really let go, and it felt good. And so I've been actually focused on doing better at that and letting everything out for quite a long time now.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned like going out into the woods and just screaming at the top of your lungs, because literally within the last week, I heard a woman say the same thing to my son about like, hey, just go out into the woods and just yell.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah. Kind of get those. Get that out so you don't keep it all in.
Sure.
yeah. How about you, Andy?
I'd say as I've gotten older, I'm better at expressing my emotions. Like if you watch any of our pre-shows, you know, I'm not afraid to say if I'm watching a movie or something with dads and kids, I will start bawling like, or anything nowadays seems like. But mourning, I haven't had a lot of mourning in my life like that I've had to deal with, thankfully. But like when, you know, family passes or things like that, like I think we all deal with mourning in our own way too. So it's also, there's not one specific way that it works for everybody.
Yeah.
So if you see somebody mourning a certain way, don't judge them, because that might be how they're processing it. They might use humor. They might use this. They might use that. So, so as I've gotten older, I've gotten much better. Plus, when I stopped listening to what people say about how you're supposed to be, men don't do this, men don't do that. I was like, no, actually, if you read the Bible, men do that. Like, those are men, in my opinion.
Right.
Like Jesus didn't surround himself with boys; he surrounded himself with men, and they ate together, they worshiped together, they cried together, they prayed together, they lived together. So, I've gotten better at it.
Yeah, I'd
about
probably
you?
put myself at a solid 5.
Yeah, it depends on the type of
Yeah, it really depends on the situation. I definitely wrestle with all right, stuff it down and move forward. Who has time to mourn right now? Let's go. So I definitely struggle with that some. But then there's other times where I feel like I have a good, healthy, and for me, it's my dashboard quite often. Yelling in the car. Why?
Yep.
I look like the crazy person, you know, as I'm driving down the
Just
highway.
pulling up next
people are
to
just
Perry and you look over and he's like,
Yeah, I've had a few of those dashboard conversations that were at a heated level.
If these dashboards could talk.
Oh my. So this next question is maybe a little bit deeper, a little bit more explanation, but tell a story when tragedy struck in your life and you were able to see God's purposes for it in the end.
So what felt like a tragedy at the time was when I went through a divorce and didn't want it. And I was separated from my children, and it wasn't something that my family did. But now I have an amazing life. And a really respected person said to me, sometimes God takes you out of a situation that you don't have enough strength to get yourself out of. I really just have an amazing life, and I have a relationship that anybody would be blessed to have. And I know it was for the best overall. My children came through it well. So
Yeah.
difficult, but
Yeah.
I can see it now.
Yeah. I'm sure there were times in the middle of it that you were just like, you probably couldn't see the purpose in the middle of it.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
That's when I was screaming.
Yeah. Understandable. How about you, Elizabeth?
the like biggest tragedy thing that I've ever experienced, I feel like there are little things that I'm like noticing, like, oh, like God showed up in this way, but I'm really, to be 100% transparent and honest, I'm struggling to see like the entire God's purpose of it, because I mean, like, last year my uncle went in the hospital, had a flesh-eating bacteria that took half of his lower body, and then made it through that. And then when the healing process started, they found stage 4 cancer. And it's like this 2-month process, to which then going through hospice and all of that, watching that unfold and watching him pass away was that was the one that I like. There are still moments where I catch myself not 100% being like, oh, he's still here. Because the time I saw him before that, he was totally fine. And so it's like it was really hard to process. And there are so many moments that I really try to remember through that I see God's like purpose, because when my uncle was in the hospital, my cousin, his youth pastor, came and they prayed with my uncle. And I didn't know this story until at his funeral, but the youth pastor got up and he shared this story that there was, he asked my uncle, how can I pray for you? Like, what do you want me to pray about right now? And my first thought, I was like, oh, he's going to say like that I can be healed and that I can whatever. And he said that he never said anything about that. It was just that he wanted everyone that he knew and that he loved, his family and his friends, to find Jesus so that he can be with them again. He can be in heaven with all of his people and God. And it was like the most, like, I lost it when I heard that story, because I felt like it was such like why was my first thought, oh, like heal like myself, like, and so I feel like for me mentally it has helped like shift my perspective for like the tiniest little God's purpose through all of it. But that's like, it's so hard to take these big tragedies and be like, how, like, what is, like, what is God's purpose through all that? Because obviously that none of sickness or dying was ever his original plan. And so it's those big tragedies that are really hard to like wrap my head around and like find the like what
Yeah, that's a really good point to make, though. God didn't intend for any of this to happen. Like when he designed this earth, it didn't have any of this stuff.
No.
It didn't have pain, it didn't have suffering, it didn't have disease, it didn't have any of that. And so it's an important point to note that when we go through this stuff, God is sorrowful too.
Yeah.
Because he didn't want us to have to go through with it. But it's a part of our life now because of sin, which we kind of open conversation with. But the other point that I think is really important to make with your experiences, there are times where it will take years and years and years to actually see anything good come out of our tragedies. And I think the more difficult those tragedies are, oftentimes the longer it takes for us to truly understand it. That was kind of, I maybe didn't make the point quite good enough, but that was kind of the point I was trying to make when I mentioned the lame man, the paralyzed man who was healed. I mean, we don't know exactly how old he was, but we know he was a man. Yeah. So let's assume at least 20 years of paralysis. Yeah. Ugh, that'd be awful. But yeah, I can relate with you, because there's been things that have happened in my life where it's just like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Andy?
As I mentioned before, I've been pretty blessed in my life to not be struck with a lot of tragedy. But funny you mentioned that. Your story made me think of my Uncle Gary, who out of all my uncles, Uncle Gary was like the fun, crazy one. Like when you'd show up at his house, he'd be wearing like karate pants in his backyard. Never took karate, but he was out kicking around, and then we'd be in the like pool, and he'd jump kick into the pool over and stuff. And
sounds so
but
much
always,
like you.
always just one of those guys. But he also had stage 4 cancer, but we got to deal with it through multiple stages. So but it was one of those things. I remember when we went and visited him one time towards the end, and I asked him, I was like, why? Because there was one other potential thing he could try, and I said, why aren't you trying it? And he said, because. He goes, Andy, I prayed about it, and God doesn't want me to do it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know how I could do that. Because, if it were my dad, I'm like, no, do everything you can so you can stay with me as long as possible because I'm selfish. And that same thing, he said, he just said, he goes, I know I'm going to go up there. I'm going to be with him, and I will, see you all one day. And I was just like, huh. And then at his, funeral service, my uncle and dad got up and they said the same thing. Every time they would talk to him, they were like, what do when they would pray, what can we pray for? He goes, pray for everybody around me, or pray that the doctors who I was able to talk to, if they didn't believe. And I was like, I wish I had that kind of outlook on things. Because I know if something happened to me, I'd be like, I got to stay around as long as I can for this or that. That fight or flight kicks in. So very, very similar. But that's one that has stood out to me and kind of still makes me think like, I hope I can be that brave one day, if it ever happens.
Absolutely.
Well, going off from what Elizabeth said and what you just said, your dad told me one time, I forget the exact situation
a Randyism
we're talking about, but he said, I will be healed.
Yeah.
Either in heaven or here on earth.
Oh, wow.
That's
But I'm going to be healed.
Wow.
And that stuck with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that really points to the perspective that really is different from a Christian perspective than any other perspective, is that we have this hope for the future of heaven and the new earth that God's going to create for us, where all these things won't exist again and the time is going to be so much longer. And I think that's why your uncle said what he said. He's like, this did not end too well for me, but we're going to be in heaven again one day.
The beginning of something great.
And it's going to be amazing and so much better than anything we experience here. And so that is such a huge thing.
And this time where that happened, it's just a blip on the radar compared to eternal life with everybody else. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, since I shared one during the service, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. Because
you got to go sing.
Elizabeth has to go sing anyway, and this was our last question. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you do have any questions about the message or about anything else, we invite your questions. We do a midweek Q&A every single week, or just about every single week, to try to help answer those. And even if they're tough, and you can submit them completely anonymously, so that you don't feel weird, like if we see you on a Sunday morning or something like that. Oh, you're the one who asked that question. But if you want anyone to follow up with you, don't use that question. Make sure you fill out a Connect card to give us your information so we can actually follow up with you. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Just know that we love you here, but Jesus loves you even more. So we'll see you all again next week.